Meow.
Guten Tag. Welcome to Historic Figures with Dr. Igor von Kopfstein. Today we will look into the life of Scarface Al Capone. Capone is America's best-known gangster and the single greatest symbol of the collapse of law and order in America during the 20s Prohibition era. Capone had a leading role in the illegal activities that gave Chicago its reputation as a lawless city.
Alphonse Capone was born to Italian immigrant parents on January 17, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York. Capone's criminal path started early. He grew up in a rough neighborhood and was a member of the toughest local kid gangs, the Brooklyn Rippers and the 40 Thieves Juniors. He stole things and used his fists when necessary. Although Al was bright and did quite well in school, he learned more on the street than he actually did in school. Capone quit school in the 6th grade at the age of 14. He lost his temper at the teacher. She hit him and he hit her back. He was expelled and he never went to school again. Capone then worked at odd jobs to help support his family. He was a clerk in a candy store, a pin boy in a bowling alley, and a cutter in a bookbindery. A few blocks away from the Capone house was a small, unobtrusive building that was the headquarters of one of the most successful gangsters on the East Coast, Johnny Torrio. Torrio was a new breed of gangster. He transformed crude racketeering into a kind of corporate structure, allowing his business to expand as opportunities emerged. Torrio was shrewd, fair, peace-loving, and a respectable man. Torrio was a role model for many boys in the community. Capone, like many other boys his age, earned pocket money by running errands for Johnny Torrio. Over time, Torrio came to trust the young Capone and gave him more to do. It was from Torrio young Capone learned invaluable lessons that were foundation of the criminal empire he built later in Chicago.
In 1909, Torrio moved to Chicago, and young Al fell under other influences. Capone joined the notorious Five Points gang in Manhattan, headed by Frankie Yale. Yale was both feared and respected. Frankie Yale built his turf on muscle and aggression. Yale took Capone under his wing and impressed upon him how business can be built up through brutality. Yale opened a bar on Coney Island called the Harvard Inn and hired, at the recommendation of Johnny Torrio, the 18-year-old Al Capone. Capone's job at the Harvard Inn was to be the bartender and bouncer, and when necessary, to wait on tables. While working at the inn, Capone received his infamous facial scars and the resulting nickname Scarface, when he insulted a patron and was attacked by her brother.
Hey, nice ass. I mean that as a compliment. Is this guy giving you trouble, sis? I can kick your man. Oh, damn it.
At the age of 19, Al met a pretty blonde Irish girl named Mary May Coughlin, who was 2 years older than he was. She worked as a department store clerk. On December 30th, 1918, Capone married May. To you, Alphonse Capone, take Mary Coughlin to be your wife. I do. And you, Mary Coughlin, take Alphonse Capone to be your husband. I now pronounce you married wife, and may kiss the bride. Before their marriage, May had given birth to his son, Albert Francis Sonny Capone. They had no other children. With a beautiful, respectable wife and a baby to support, Al focused on a legitimate career. He stopped working for Frankie Yale and moved to Baltimore, where he worked as a capable bookkeeper for a construction firm. Al did very well. He was smart, had a good head for figures, and was very reliable.
Quite suddenly, Al did another about face. Back to the liquor department. We will return to the show right after a short commercial break.
New Skippy non-separating peanut butter? It's just so peanutty. I could eat this stuff right out of the jar. But what else could I do with this peanut butter? Jelly? Bread? I know, I'll make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
It's peanut butter jelly time! Peanut butter jelly time! Peanut butter jelly time!
Everybody else is enjoying the peanutty taste of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Why don't you?
Hey, you try my potato first.
Okay.
That's pretty good.
What'd you say they were called?
Potato chips. They're in a bag, so you can take them anywhere.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
I take them to my job, if I had one.
Yeah, pretty good. Are they,
Take them at home, too.
Kenny, are they good for you?
Yes, they're so fast.
So, like, how much did you pay for that?
Less than $1.
Woo!
Good deal.
Yeah. Let's go this way and eat some more potato chips.
Welcome back to Historic Figures with Dr. Igor von Kopfstein. Old friend and mentor Johnny Torrio beckoned from Chicago, and early in 1921, Hal accepted an offer to work for him. Armed with his knowledge of business and his experience from the brutal Frankie Yale, Capone had a good resume for a career in crime.
Torrio immediately recognized Capone's talents, and soon Capone was hired at the Four Deuces. The Four Deuces was a speakeasy, gambling joint, and whorehouse all in one. His job was as a bouncer and a roper.
Hey guys, they got some nice ladies inside. You wanna take a look?
James Colosimo, better known as Big Jim, was a big shot in Chicago. Torrio did such a great job with Colosimo's dives that Big Jim made him a lieutenant. Torrio foresaw lots of profit to be made with the illegal alcohol trade. He implored his boss, Big Jim, to partake in the profit before it was too late, but Big Jim refused. Colosimo's reluctance to move into this area of crime led to his murder on May 11th, 1920, in the foyer of his own nightclub. The people of Chicago were tired of reading about gang violence, and the newspapers fanned out their anger. Capone held a highly publicized peace conference, in which he appealed to the other bootleggers assembled there to tone down the violence.
Scattered. Beer wars began, blood flowed, and bombs exploded once again. Capone's enemies ended up dead. North Side gangster and flower shop owner Jan O'Banion wanted more power and money. He tried to swindle Torrio and Capone on a brewery deal. On November 10, 1924, O'Banion was in his flower shop fixing flowers for a gangster's funeral. 3 gangsters came into the shop. He greeted the men and prepared to shake hands. One of the men pulled O'Banion's arm and knocked him off balance, and riddled him with bullets. When Torrio retired in 1925, Capone took over his organization.
In the following years, Capone consolidated his control over organized crime in Chicago by eliminating his competitors one by one in a series of gang wars. The most notorious slaying was the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, in which Capone's gunmen, dressed as policemen, lined up 7 members of the rival Bugs Moran gang and cut them down with machine guns.
So, we go to Bugs' place, right?
Yeah, 2122 North Clark Street.
What's this place anyways?
You really don't know? It's Bugs Main Liquor headquarters.
Drop your weapons and put your hands on the wall!
With 2 machine guns, over 150 bullets were fired at the 7 men in the garage. All of them died. The real target of this massacre was Moran, but he wasn't there. Moran knew Capone was to blame, but when he was brought back to court, his alibi that he was at his home in Florida checked out fine. But in 1931, he returned to the courtroom because he did not pay his income taxes. Al Capone was sent to Alcatraz. He was harassed by his inmates. They often called him Scab or Rat. Al Capone was assigned to mopping up the prison bathhouse.
I've been waiting for this, Capone.
Get you back, Stanley. You just earned yourself solitary confinement.
Al Capone was hospitalized for a week. more attempts on his life were made, including spiking his coffee and attacking him. Capone's mental state began to deteriorate. He would repeatedly make his bed and undo it for hours. At times, Capone refused to leave his cell at all, crouching in a corner and talking to himself in Italian, or according to some, complete gibberish. He began telling people that he was being haunted by the ghost of James Clark, a victim at the St. Valentine's Day massacre. On January 21st, 1947, Capone had a stroke. He regained consciousness and started to improve, but contracted pneumonia on January 24th and suffered a cardiac arrest on the next day. Al Capone was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, west of Chicago. There are two lessons that can be learned from Capone's life. Crime does pay, and pay your income taxes, or they will come for you. Thank you and good night.